A very good morning from Kampala on the 24th of September to 2020. And this is a Thursday. It's a rather dull, cloudy morning. Maybe we'll have some shower today. And it's cool and quiet and nice. You're welcome to this program. It's a special briefing, which is supposed to have been a part of our weekly briefings that takes place on Saturday. We had a briefing on Saturday, last Saturday, and we chose to divide the briefing then into dealing with COVID at that time and leave the governance part for today. And so this part will mainly focus on the governance questions of our country, Uganda. Again, you are most welcome. I'd like to hope that since we parted on Saturday, you've been well. And those who have had problems, I express my sympathies to them. Of course, we have been grappling with the disaster that took place at Makerere, where the iconic main building of this central institution of higher learning in Uganda was burnt down. And it's a big shock, and it's painful, especially to those of us who went through that institution and who are greatly attached to it. It was quite obviously an indication of the dysfunctionality that we have in our country, because Makerere University is a huge institution. It has more than 40,000 students and another maybe 2,000, 5,000 staff. And it is right in the center of the city. There is a police division headquarters. Near it, there is a police station within the university. So for a fire to break out and burn such a building and destroy it completely must show how our systems simply do not function. We invest in fighting vehicles, not vehicles to protect people from such disasters. And so we have very, very few fire tenders. I understand that the whole country has 96 fire tenders for the whole country. And most of these are quite old and of very poor technology. We have a firefighting force, one about 650 firefighters for the whole country, again showing, our gross lack of prioritization of emergency services. I express my sympathy for those that were affected by that disaster. Now, this briefing on governance is directed to a particular audience. Uganda is a deeply divided country. We have a very small section of our country, of our people, who are highly served by the state of Uganda. And we have the greatest majority of Ugandans that are excluded, that are marginalized, whom the country does not work for. And it is this side of people that I address my views. If you are among the privileged, those whom the country works for, and I mean those who get services, who get quality education, who get quality health care, both domestically and even abroad from state funds, those who, access good education. And again, we have many people sponsored on government money in international universities, some of the most expensive universities paid by the poor peasants of our country. Those who have clean water and those who don't, those who have, good sanitary conditions. So there are those that the country works for, and this address is frankly not for them. But there are the others who cannot access healthcare, who cannot access good education, who cannot access clean water, who cannot get jobs. Jobs are reserved for who cannot get security, and in fact, who are terrorized by the state security institutions rather than protected. And so this address is targeted to this community. In fact, talking about such people reminds me of a young man who, again, a few days back, was grabbed from his home for the second time in a short while. This is a young man called Kakwenza Rukira Basaija, who lives in Uganda, was grabbed at dawn, taken to an unknown place, and is now being released. I understand he was first taken to Mbuya, some military installation, where he is tortured and interrogated and so on. And eventually he was released after a couple of days, and our making all kinds of noise and getting to the courts to demand his production in court. He was eventually given a police bond and just released. This happened to him similarly a short while back. This is simply because this young man has been writing what those with power do not want anybody to write about, the failures of the regime and things like that. I understand he has written a book called The Banana Republic. This is the matter over which he was now arrested and tortured. So my address is for that part of our country. And today, we shall not be having a question and answer session at the end. I'd like to encourage those who have questions or suggestions or comments to put them in the comment section on the Facebook, where this program is going to be is being broadcast live, or on the WhatsApp, on the Twitter comment section. After this session, I will go to those areas and respond to your questions, comments, or whatever remarks you make. Now, before I dive deep into the governance issues, the politics of our country, and this is a very highly political season, I would like to have a quick recap of the COVID situation. First of all, to bring you up to speed with what is happening in that area. But secondly, to also briefly comment on what Mr. Museveni, who controls our state resources and controls state institutions, said on COVID on Sunday of this week. So first, the COVID situation in the country is, as I have been saying, rapidly getting worse. We are seeing increasing numbers of those confirmed positive from very narrowing numbers of tests. So the numbers of tests are actually shrinking. A few weeks back, there were tests daily of 6,000, 5,000, and so on. These days, it is about 2,000. And from 2,000, there is an average of about 150 per day to 200. I think the last reported testing, which was on 22nd, that was on Tuesday. The testing on Tuesday, there was 179, again from about 2,000 tests. And these tests are scattered across the country. But in urban areas, this is much, much worse. I'm sure if 10,000 tests were done in our city here in Kampala, we would find about 2,000 or 3,000 positives in a day. So the figures that you see really don't mean much in as far as the actual situation in the country is concerned. So we have a very serious situation of COVID. And once again, I would like to invite our countrymen and women to take this matter with the necessary seriousness that it deserves. Now, I also pointed out at the last briefing that we have large community transmission. Community transmission meaning spreading the virus not from known contacts. Those who become positive from known contacts of previously positive people are not the community spread. Community spread is when it is spread from those that are whose how they became positive is not known. And there is a large community spread. When you have a situation of large community spread like we have, then the control measures that we were preoccupied with in trying to limit the spread of the virus become irrelevant. This is something which I don't know who is advising Mr. Museveni on this, why they can't appreciate that we are at a situation where the spread of the virus is, if you like, uncontrollable. Trying to trace contacts is a waste of resources now. When there is large community transmission, you stop trying to trace contacts. That is wasted resource. And also all the other limitations, people shouldn't move, shouldn't do this. This is why even on the Saturday briefing, I said the borders of Uganda should be promptly opened, because it doesn't make any sense in that situation trying to restrict the movement across our borders or to try and quarantine people who are coming into the country. It's nonsensical. And I'm glad, at least to some extent, that came through what Mr. Museveni said on Sunday, because he did indeed announce that the borders would be opened, though he again said it in a very awkward way, that he was opening the airport and borders for tourists, which is I mean, ridiculous. But I think pointing into his mind frame. And he was even trying to say that tourists will be herded to where they are going and herded back to the airport, all of which, frankly, is unnecessary. So that is the situation of COVID in which we are, that the spread can no longer really be followed, monitored, and controlled. And to that extent, I did point out on Saturday that what we need to focus on is the individual responsibility. The responses that are for all of us, public responses have collapsed. It now calls into action individual responsibility. Every person out there listening to me should now take it upon him or herself to protect your own life. And this is achievable. It's achievable by, first of all, avoiding to be amongst other people when you are not putting on a mask and putting it on properly. And remember, putting on a mask actually secures others more than it secures yourself. So secure others as you go to mix with them. But it also gives you some level of protection, you, the person putting on the mask. So the use and right use of the masks is a matter that you must take seriously. And it must be your own responsibility. You shouldn't wait to be forced, to be coerced. No, either you use it or you get the consequences yourself. You'll pay the price yourself. So let's use the masks. Use them properly to cover the nose and the mouth, and to make sure that even on the sides, they are covered. Secondly, the hygiene, the frequent washing with soap of hands, and the protection of your mouth and eyes from contamination. That hygiene is very important. Make sure you don't sneeze amongst people. Sneeze, cough. If you want to sneeze or cough, make sure your mouth is covered. So the hygiene, first masks, 2, hygiene. 3, the immunity that you have. Because even with all those measures, the virus can still enter you. Prepare your body in case it enters you. Once again, make sure that you have good nutrition. Use the immune booster that we have been, popularizing, which is how to make is on our social media platforms. Use the immune booster. Have enough sleep. Do exercise daily of at least 30 minutes. Make sure you don't overindulge in alcohol. Stop smoking if you are smoking. In other words, give your body a good fighting chance if the virus gets to you. And it will sooner or later get to you. On the part, the main part that is now remaining really for government and public consumption should be education, should be passing the right messages, not fudging, no confusion. Let everybody understand their personal responsibility. Again, this is to move away from enforced discipline, which, as we all know, generally does not work. When you force people, they only respond because of your force. When the force is off, they take off whatever they are doing. Just like we have people who don't put on safety belts in their car. When they see the police, they put on the safety belt. After going through the police check, they release them because they don't know what the safety belts are for. So we must emphasize conscientious discipline amongst our people. Now, regarding the measures that Mr. Museveni touched on, therefore, I want to emphasize that as a people, we must focus on getting our children, all our children, back to school. With the large community transmission that we have, children are more exposed to danger. The risk is higher outside schools than in schools because they are in their villages or playing amongst themselves anyway, and without any regulation or control or monitoring. So it is safer for our children to be in school environment where they can be regulated, controlled, monitored, and if there are those becoming sick, attended to promptly. I have seen since a debate expected in the parliament regarding how even the candidate classes go back. People talking about testing the teachers. Again, like I said, of the other measures that we were talking about, these should not be impediments, really. Yes, schools that can test these teachers should do so, but that does not mean that even those that have been given a clean certificate will not contract the virus the next day from the communities in which they live. They will. So the preoccupation is to have these children in a controlled environment, to give them the information that I am talking about so that every kid knows what to do, how to secure themselves, and how to live together in this environment, in the new environment. Two, that those who develop symptoms are quickly removed, tested, and managed if positive. But short of that, really, we are simply wasting time. Now, let's also remember that children are the least vulnerable. So having them away from those older people who are who are the most vulnerable people is an important public health maneuver. And so let's all advocate for our children back to school. All of them, not just the candidate classes. All kids should go back to school. And we deal with the situations that arise therein. We make of course, we should make the necessary preparations to make sure there is a sick bay that is prepared, that has equipment, that has expertise to manage some of these problems. Two, once the kids are at school, let's invest in feeding them. Because again, immunity is significantly influenced by diet. Now, most of our children are in homes now that are food insecure. And so, actually, you'll find that children will increasingly become anemic, increasingly become vulnerable. If we bring them back to the school environment, as a country, we should invest in having a feeding program for the children at school. Even if we were to borrow to do that, that would be good borrowing to feed these children so that we are saving the future generation. So on education, I really call for immediate action, and I'm going to be engaging the various stakeholders to see how we can build the necessary pressure to ensure that these policy shifts actually take place. Now, regarding the curfew, again, in our situation with the curfew now is not a health measure. Let nobody again confuse issues. We are not going to save the transmission through these restrictions that actually push our people into more desperation. Because if you stop a boda operating at 6 o'clock and cause those who are trying to beat the time to be harassed, their bodas arrested, they get bribes taken from them, when this is not really helping the spread either way, then what is it for? If it is for security, which it can only be for, if you think that curfew time will reduce on security, then why are we investing, so heavily in having all the soldiers that we have pushed out, and the guns and everything, Surely, you can't deprive people from earning in spite of that huge investment in the security apparatus that we have. So I think the curfew does not serve any purpose. It is further constraining our people's ability to earn and to survive. I think curfew should be done away with. Certainly, the bodas, again, I'm going to be working with all these stakeholders to make sure that the necessary pressure builds to free themselves. Similarly, worship places, it's nonsensical again to say, people should not go to church more than 70. It's just nonsensical. It's as if, people who are talking like this don't know what is happening in town here. If you are not intervening in any way or manner in what is going on in Kikubo, in those markets as they are now, how can you seek to restrict churches that are organized, that have ushers giving people where to sit, that have all the necessary control measures, and they are the ones you are focusing on to restrict? It's nonsensical. So again, the various restrictions that have been put on our people, including markets and so on, that some markets will not be allowed. I think all these barriers should be broken down. And as I have said, people concentrate on their personal protection, because that is the only thing now available in our response to this COVID. Of course, and maybe I should just end with this, the cancer that is eating up the whole country is now at the center of COVID response. Corruption. Corruption now, I think, has rendered the COVID response totally distorted, because, you know, I'm sure all of you out there are following what is happening, for example, to people who are coming from abroad, who are put in hotels, expensive hotels, and once the period, the 14-day period ends, they declare them positive, even when they are negative, and transfer them to other centers again to extort money from them, and so on and so forth. I think we all know now that getting a COVID test, whether in a government institution, a private institution, or whatever, is increasingly for pay. Otherwise, they'll tell you it will take 3 days, it will take a long time, you may not, you know. So everybody is being now asked to pay if you want quick results, pay. And hence, you know, the confusion in the kind of results that one gets with all these testing. And even the fact that there is a pay for testing is in itself very regrettable. But all this is really the purpose for which we must have a conversation on our governance. And I will now move to the governance situation. Now, dear Ugandans, I am sure that if you live in the section of Ugandans that I talked about, the excluded Ugandans who constitute upwards of 90% of the population, you must be feeling the crisis in our country that intensifies daily. Even before COVID, there was a crisis. That crisis was simply escalated by the COVID lockdown. The post-COVID lockdown, Uganda is hell for most Ugandans. We have a very, very serious crisis. Expectedly, the handful of people who are the beneficiaries of the country seem not to know or even to bother about the crisis that the country is experiencing at the moment. And so, if you look at the social economic crisis, whether in the rural or urban areas, the rapid urbanization is actually a sign of the rural crisis. The crisis was more intense in the rural areas. That's why people are fleeing into the urban centers. Why? Because the rural economy is collapsed. The first victim of the 35 years of NRM Museveni junta was the collapse of the rural economy. And this was deliberate. They were deliberate steps that were taken to impoverish our communities, including destruction of rural, of the agriculture, the peasant agriculture and its support systems, the cooperative movement that supported rural agriculture and marketing. Because In the prior years, rural people paid for all their needs from their production. That is no longer the case. You have people in the rural areas, everybody indebted. Every person, in fact, well, even the urban, but now all those in the rural areas live on debt from what has mushroomed all over the country called the circles, the credit organizations. Everybody has a debt from a circle. Women have run away from their homes, running away from debt. Families have broken. So there is a rural crisis, economic, social, economic crisis. People dying and failing to get even dead bodies from hospitals because they can't pay the cost of treatment. There is a deep crisis in the rural areas. In the urban areas, it is the same. And this is what the COVID lockdown intensified was mainly the urban crisis. Because most of the informal sector within urban areas was decimated by the lockdown. You know, the small traders, those who are frying chicken, who are doing what, they were decimated. Small farmers, with the small poultry activities and so on, these were decimated. So the means of livelihood has greatly decreased. You have now in Uganda internally displaced people, not from insecurity, but now even from natural disasters. People have been, thousands of people displaced by flooding in different parts of the country, who have lost their homes, who have lost their belongings that they use for survival, who are totally destitute. They are all over the place. So we have homelessness now in our country. Hunger and food insecurity is extremely high. And that is why, indeed, we have been seeing an escalation of suicides, people killing themselves. Even this 1 week ago, another border man, Emmanuel, I think he's called Emmanuel Kavanda, burned himself from Chireka. He died in Chirudu the other day. Burning, this is, it started with Warugembe, Hussein Warugembe in Masaka. Since that time, 6 people have burnt themselves in Kampala. 6 since that time, without including this Emmanuel Kavanda. And that is not including those who kill themselves by hanging and by all other kinds of means. Why? Because of desperation. People reaching the wall and not knowing what more to do. This is how urgent the situation in which we are is. It's really very, very urgent. If you see the numbers of people being evicted from homes for lack of payment of rent, with children, with what, every day, everywhere, it's a common occurrence everywhere. You should know the crisis that I'm talking about. Now, how did we get into this crisis? It's not difficult to understand. It's because of the structure of the economy. It's because of the structure of the state. Indeed, working for a few, isolating and excluding others. That's at the heart of what has been happening. Who gets opportunities for business? Who can access bank loans? Who can access good jobs? You know, access has been slanted. Secondly, the overinvestment in protection of the state, regime survival. A lot of resources are drained from provision, from service to people, to protection of the regime. That's why we have all kinds of fighting paraphernalia, you know, jets, fighting jets, supersonic jets, all kinds of artillery, all kinds of missiles, all kinds of, you know, huge numbers of soldiers, and still, while there is nothing for protection of people. While we cannot have ambulances, we cannot have firefighters, we cannot have, you know, the things that every day a person needs to survive. That is at the heart of the matter. Exclusion and investment in regime protection. Now, to intensify that has come in the whole question of debt. Debt would ordinarily be good. Everybody who develops will develop faster if they can get in more capital into whatever they are doing. But that's not so for a regime like what we have today. We are not borrowing for investment in our people. We are borrowing for, again, either investment in regime protection or investment that benefits the few. And that's why, you know, when you ask what the regime has done, they will show you some roads that they have constructed. Say, we have built roads. But you've built roads for who? Because roads in and by themselves will not change the situation of people. Roads, in fact, can be built to more efficiently exploit the population. That's why the colonialists were also building roads. The colonialists were building roads to the ocean so that they could transport our wealth to their countries. It was not so that we may develop from them. It was so that they may drain us. They are conduits for taking wealth from one group to another. And that is pretty much what our roads are doing today. They will build the roads to externalize our wealth. The structure of that, the logic of the infrastructure has not changed. The logic hasn't changed. The dams, the British built Owen Falls Dam, not so that our people may have power in their homes, but so that they could smelter the copper and take the purified copper away and dump the waste for us in Ginger. And there are heaps of waste dumped in Ginger, which was the leftover of our copper. So if you build a dam, we just don't clap for you because you've built a dam for your purpose, not for ours. Of course, there may be some spin-off benefits, but they are few and far apart. So it is that structure of the economy where you are not investing in people, where you are taking from people the little they have, not investing back, borrowing on their behalf, but not for their benefit, that has led us to where we are today, to this crisis. Of course, as I have said, COVID has accelerated it, especially the lockdown. But the crisis is inherent, it is there. Now, these domestic exploiters, the gunmen, those who control power in Uganda, prefer to work with foreigners because foreigners don't threaten their political power. They prefer to work with foreigners. If foreigners get money, they take it to their countries. They fear Ugandans getting money. So part of the crisis we have is that the economy is increasingly in foreign hands. Look at the banks in Uganda. Who controls the financial institutions in Uganda? They are all foreign. The Ugandans who tried to do banking were indeed sabotaged and collapsed and not assisted. And they are gone. I think the last one who was struggling was Sudir. Well, even himself, of course, is originally from outside. But now, the only surviving and endangered species in the financial system is Centenary Bank. And I have no doubt that it is in the sights of the regime for destruction. So you have the economy controlled by foreigners. The privileges given to foreigners. Free land to foreigners. Last night I was seeing the Minister of Lands, Betkamia, saying that investors that have been given free land have sold it. But of course, why shouldn't they? You know, if you give somebody, you know, the land of Shimoni, where Shimoni wants, Shimoni primary, Shimoni secondary, Shimoni demonstration schools, I don't know how many, 10 acres or whatever, 10 acres that Shimoni had, you give it to one investor free. Land which in itself maybe is about $30 million. Why not say they can sell it for $30 million and go to invest it somewhere else? You know? So this is the problem. And the crisis, intense crisis that we have on our hands. Social economic crisis. We have a crisis now with our education. Because Uganda's education is now largely in private hands. Government has ceded education to the private sector. That in itself is problematic. And it is unstoppable because what remains of the government education is of a quality that any parent would not wish for their children. UPE, USE, is a sure way to a failed, development in education. You go to UPE, USE, then become a crime preventer or something like that, security guard. No parent wishes their children that kind of life. Now, with the lockdown, there is a danger. All these private schools getting destroyed because they are all now in deep crisis. And nobody is really caring. The teachers have almost been decimated by the last 6 months of no pay. So teachers are frying chapati, preparing chikomando in some places. Some have gone into digging in the villages and so on, which in itself is a good thing that, our people are, versatile. That if this fails, they quickly adapt to other situations. But that is going to mean that the generations of Ugandans that are in the schooling system may go down the drain. And we were doing badly already. There is an urgent crisis in the education area to deal with. This is pretty urgent. Very, very urgent. We are now talking about homeschooling. Really? Can the families of Ugandans that we all know afford homeschooling? Again, the people who talk about these concepts are detached. They don't know the homes they are talking about. They are totally detached. And, even the homes that could have that kind of environment, which homes have money to pay for the internet to do homeschooling on the line? Which homes? Having talked about the economy, the socio-economic situation. So again, as part of this crisis, we must keep a focus on our education. Now, having said that, and talked a bit about where this comes from, let me now zoom into the politics. Because the economy, security, services, they are all controlled by the politics. Who has a voice is at the heart of this matter. Who has a voice in what goes on? Who has a say? And because that's where everything arises from, the solution too must start there. We shall not solve the economy challenges. We shall not solve the social system challenges We shall not solve the security challenges. We shall not solve any of these problems without solving the political question. It's not possible because everything is determined by the politics. Who decides? Who decides? Who has a say? If you don't have a say, you are excluded. And, we are right now in a very, very critical time. Not only in the what is called the electoral cycle, that there is another election coming up, but a critical time in the history of our country. If we lose the moment, this moment, it may take another couple of decades before it will be possible to redress the situation I am talking about. Moments are very critical things. When some of us disagreed with the Museveni leadership of NRM and where he was taking it, we did not agree. We were all agreed that there is something seriously wrong. We are going in the wrong direction, but we did not agree on when to intervene, when to take action. Some of us said it's a critical time to take action now, while others said, no, let's give it time. The Constitution says that, Museveni will not go beyond 2 terms. Even when the signs were all over the place that Museveni would not respect the Constitution. But some of our people did not see the critical nature of the timing then. That if we didn't intervene at that point, we would lose a huge opportunity that would take decades to regain. That was 2000. We are now 2 decades away. Lost 2 decades, gone. A generation is gone. And this, the cost is so huge. I've been lately focusing on our children. The fact that 1 in every 3 children is stunted for life, is stunted, does not develop, and will remain like that for life, is a very, very, very serious matter. So, children, it means 1/3 of the children that have been born over the last 20 years. And the children that are 20 years and below now are over 60% of Ugandans. Those who were born between 2000 and now, they are more than 60% of Ugandans. 1/3 of those are stunted for life. And we are to blame. We are guilty of stunting those children for life. So you make one small mistake, the cost is extremely high. With this socio-economic situation that I talked about, our country faces an existential threat very clearly direct existential threat. If we don't resolve this quickly, we stand to disappear from the face of this earth. It's not a threat. I'm not just theorizing and threatening. It's happening even now in our own eyes. Who is taking the biggest land now in Uganda? Who is taking chunks, 40,000 hectares that is being allocated in Amuru, in Atiaka, where, in Ruengo district, in Busoga? Who is taking the land? It's not you and me. This country is already being taken over. We have to wake up. We have a duty. The reason I wake up every day, and the reason some people say, I rant, I do whatever, let me rant. But I am putting on record a view that will be interrogated tomorrow. Whether this is what we need to do or not. So that at least I absorb myself and our colleagues, those that we are of the same thinking, that we can absorb ourselves of the crime of keeping quiet when we know that a disaster is looming. So, the political crisis in Uganda is that we have a country which was created by foreigners, controlled by foreigners for 70 years, and now, since 1962, controlled by gunmen up to now. So, it's a country that has served two types of people: foreigners, and secondly, the gunmen. Gunmen actually have always worked with foreigners. So, the exclusion of Ugandans has been for a very, very long time. Now, this exclusion, this crisis, the political crisis, which is now very evident, the two sides are not confused. The excluded people know themselves. They come up all the time. In every election, they come up to try and free themselves. Those of you who remember, in 2016, you saw the excluded Ugandans coming up. When Mr. Museveni was changing the constitution to remove age limit, all these excluded people came up and said, please don't touch our constitution. So the excluded Ugandans are not divided. And they know their problem. They know they want change so that they become part of the country. They know. Their problem is ourselves, the leaders, or whom my brother in his song sometimes called the misleaders. We are the problem. These excluded people are united. They know what they want. We are confused. And in our confusion, we are divided. We cannot all point in one place of what to do. We have a confusion of going along with the narrative of our captor, the one who captured the state, sets the narrative and we play within that narrative. Sets a roadmap and we adjust ourselves to walk in the roadmap of our captor. That is the problem. Why we are in this crisis. It's a crisis of leadership. Leadership on the part of the marginalized, isolated, excluded, terrorized, traumatized, dehumanized. And I have said that there is now an urgency of unparalleled proportions. There is an urgency. If we don't get our act together, and the monsters holding power get reinforced by the oil they are trying to set their hands on. We will be enslaved for another couple of decades before we are able to reorganize. That's the urgency of the matter. Let's stop the time-wasting activities that we get drawn into, that simply facilitate this pernicious process to continue. It's extremely, extremely urgent. The elections they are preparing them for themselves. The other day I heard the Archbishop, Yona Rwanga, Archbishop Yona Rwanga, the Archbishop of the Orthodox Church, lamenting, that he has not exercised his franchise, his vote, since 1980, because he's been looking at the processes and saying, I won't waste my time being part of this sham election. This is an archbishop. And I would like to invite the archbishops, our leaders who are not directly involved in politics, especially the electoral politics, to step up and play the role they need to play in redirecting the country onto service of the majority of the Ugandans. Leadership in faith is the voice of the voiceless. The contradiction in Uganda is not a partisan contradiction. Our struggle is not a partisan struggle that, you are supporting FDC or DP. No. The struggle now is for rights, fundamental rights. Fundamental rights are not a partisan issue. The right to vote, the right to having equal opportunities. This is not a partisan matter. The right to have the rule of law, constitutional governance. These are the concepts over which the struggle we are engaged in is now premised. We are not fighting about whether we use leftist means or rightist means to develop the economy. No, that we are not yet in that arena. So, in this non-partisan struggle, everybody needs to step up. The political crisis is huge. Look, Mr. Museveni has been talking about the East African community. That's the reason, he talks about, as I have said, whatever you hear him talk about, know that is what he's fighting. The East African community. If you are fighting your neighbors, how will you have an East African community? Uganda has now been at war with Rwanda for I don't know how many years now. Sudan, Congo, which is the African community. Because if you cannot solve matters within your polity, how do you interact with other polities? So the political crisis is here, and I'm going to have a short break, and afterwards we talk briefly about what we do, how we move out of this crisis. But maybe before I pen off for this part, let me also simply say, since I was talking about the religious leaders, that there is also a spiritual crisis in the country. It's not just political, economic, even spiritual. There is a spiritual crisis that we must deal with. In the 21st century, if we are dealing with the kinds of human sacrifices that we see daily, children being sacrificed, heads at the parliament, turning up at parliament of kids, this is a huge, huge crisis, and you hear all these in leaders, so I think we all need really to pull together if we are to get out of this all-round crisis after the break. Thank you.
In today's briefing,
Useful idiot nga bw'olabira ddala bbalamu simuvuma naye nja ndeta bulesi kategole y'ebyobufuzi abalinga ye bwe babayita useful idiots. Ekigambo useful idiot kyava Russia eyo ng'Abarasha abali mu buyinza bali bafunayo abasajja n'abakazi abatamanyi na kigendererwa kyabwe bali ekibakwasiza obuyinza nga abasajja abo bali badde ku ludda lw'abali abakaaba naye n'amuleeta wano ono useful idiot n'atandika okukolera oli naye nga tamanyi na kigendererwa bano basaavinga tamanyi na kigendererwa kyabwe eky'omumaaso Gandochi, it's a political term.
The citizens that use their own data. They already pay money to these online platforms, and the people that created these online platforms, the citizens are not going to pay more money.
At the onset of COVID-19, government came up with a raft of measures aimed at curtailing the spread of COVID-19. One of these would be online campaigns in which contestants for the various political positions would not be allowed to have physical interaction with the electorates.
We want to call upon the Electoral Commission to rein in on UCC, on government, to free up this space such that candidates and citizens are able to freely exchange their views.
We are going to have an education that is paid for by the government. And I believe that we should not have education that our children should be studying under mango trees like our forefathers used to do.
The 1 million jobs that we promised the people of Uganda is going to be done with the support of the people of Uganda themselves. And we think that is possible. We are going to turn job seekers into job creators. I will be turning State House or the State Lodge in Nakasero into a modern hospital.
There was a lot of thuggery in Kampala. Thuggery. Markets were being sold. Markets were being sold. Roads were being sold. Hospitals were being sold. I'm telling you, when Lukwago came, he did a fundamental job.
Elias Lukwago is one of the best lawyers in this country. He abandoned his career as a lawyer to come and liberate Kampala.
We want to have an inclusive city. We want to have a livable city, a functional city, a well-planned and organized city. A city that works for all of us. A city that accommodates all and sundry. People of all caliber, regardless of their social diversities, creed.
byonna bya kiyaye twalondebwa mu butuufu era ne lukozi weeziri era ne mwami Kibalama okuba twalangirira National Unity Platform n'obukulembeze bwayo obupya aze atiisibwatiisibwa nga bwe yabategeeza mu bannamawulire amaka ge gaze galondoolwa ebiseera ebimu nga tasula.
Has a population of 620 inmates, most of whom are from the Karamoja sub-region. On Wednesday, 219 of these prisoners escaped. According to the prison spokesperson, at the time when the incident happened, the prisoners were having dinner, and there was a group of them that was not far from the gate. When the warden sensed that there was danger, when they moved towards him, he threw the key outside, but he was later overpowered before this group forced its way into the armory, stealing 14 guns. And according to Baine, this was human error.
It means the gatekeeper wasn't alert to make sure that by the time you open, you don't have a group of prisoners close to the gate. So he could have taken it as normal business as usual, and with him he was interested in this entering the food, not caring to know that there was another group just there.
Thank you for continuing to be with us this morning. And before we went into the break, I was crystallizing for our viewers the very, very deep crisis in which our country finds itself. The greatest majority of our people find themselves, how that crisis has arisen and become worse on a daily basis, and how I consider that we are in a very, very critical moment as we speak. Indeed, where people have started taking their lives in very, very painful ways. And I have also contended that this is a very critical moment in the life of the country itself, because if we miss taking action at the right moment, the cost is going to be phenomenal, as it has been in the past. So I just want now to fairly briefly touch on what I consider as the necessary way forward. I have already pointed out that the people of Uganda who are marginalized, excluded, terrorized, dehumanized, who live in misery, are united and actually know in a large measure their situation and are very desirous to change it, and have been responding whenever the occasion arises, have been responding, enthusiastically to change this situation. And I have contended that unfortunately, the leadership that avails itself or arises within this marginalized society has not been equal to the task. And that is largely why the desired changes have not happened. And when I say we have not been equal to the task, I am not excluding myself. I have been part and parcel of the the activities, the negotiations, the strategizing of how to get out of this. And I regrettably say we have failed to deliver thus far the necessary changes. And we can interrogate, we can dissect what caused those failures. And I plan at some stage to do so, but that will be largely for academic purposes, for our history, to record and to continue a conversation on it. But in the meantime, as I've pointed out, I think we don't have the luxury to dwell on the past. We need to seize the moment, do the right thing, and by the grace of God, and we need a lot of it, get where we need to go. And I trust that God is always on the side of justice. If we do the right thing, we shall be blessed with the right outcome. The first thing, and therefore, really what I am addressing is addressing myself to the contemporary leaders acting within the sphere of the marginalized. And when I talk about leaders, I am not limiting it to political leaders. No. Or leaders who get elected. No. I am talking about all leadership, civic leadership, whether they are leaders in the non-state sector, whether they are leaders in our labor movement, whether they are leaders in our faith organizations. It's us that I am addressing. The first thing, if we all conceive of the same urgency and seriousness of the problem, and I would want to hear a debate on that, even in these platforms, are we of the same view that there is a serious crisis and that there is an urgent need for some resolution? If we are, then how do we proceed? The first critical matter is that we must scrupulously avoid competition amongst the captives. Because one of the historical tools, age-old tools, that those who dominate the majority use is to divide them so that they are no longer a majority, they are fragmented. Or even better still, to turn them on each other. But they are actually fighting. In which case, those who dominate them will just continue enjoying their barbecue. So, the first, most urgent step that we need to achieve is ending competition of any kind amongst the captives. And this competition, again, is not only limited to those who seek political offices. The fracturing is in all kinds of spheres. You know, they fracture you on even cultural lines. You find the Basoga are divided between Chavazinga and, the other one, and the Banyolo between the Bafurki and the Banyolo, the fracture planes are many. Religious groups are fractured and in a competition fighting each other. Yet their flock is getting decimated. So the ending of fights in captivity is an urgent matter. Of course, since we are talking about the politics, the fights within the political class is most urgent because we are in a political season. We must end competition within the political class at this critical phase of the struggle and creatively harness all our efforts for liberation. Now, this, to my mind, is very achievable. Elusive as it has been, it is very achievable. And we have a historical duty now. I've talked about how this is a very, very critical moment that shouldn't be lost. We have a very, very decisive moment to do this. We may not achieve it by talking amongst the competitors ourselves alone, because they are all already producing candidates. The other day, Chairman Mao emerged triumphantly as a candidate for DP. We already have a candidate for NUP. The competition is still going on for somebody to emerge out of FDC. There is already General Muntu, who is a candidate for ANT. There is General Tumukunde, who is also a candidate, I don't know, for some platform I had recently been talked about. There is, all these are already emerging to contest each other. Just talking amongst the competitors may not achieve their objective, because within our platforms are also seeds that inherently counter efforts of coming together. And the sooner we do so, the better. This is why I am making a special appeal to leaders outside the political class, the competitive politics class, to help in this matter. This is, as I have said, this is not a partisan matter. This struggle is not about partisanship. It's about simply fundamental rights, equality, justice. This is what it is about. And we must frame it rightly. Should not be confused that, we are talking about manifestos, I don't know for what. No, it's simple that we all unite for transition to a democracy where we can compete. We are not there. Let's unite to achieve an environment in which we can compete in a healthy way. And if we do that, we can achieve that change before the February elections. We can achieve it because nearly everybody in the country wants change. You saw what happened in the what NRM was calling its NRM elections, which ended up becoming an NRM war. You saw it. Demonstrations are still going on. All of those people want change. No doubt about it. You saw the people who betrayed the country and changed the constitution, how they are being pursued by the population, even amongst those that call themselves NRM. Because there is no difference whether NRM, whether what they are our people marginalized. So, I invite the leaders of this country, religious, social, community, traditional leaders to come together and save this country by helping the political class, competitive class, to rally together for liberation in this phase. It's achievable. So the first task is ending competition amongst the marginalized, the excluded, the humiliated. We must end this competition, which is, of course, manipulated, greatly manipulated by the puppet master there, manipulating, causing this one to do that. We must overcome that. If we don't, history will judge us extremely ruthlessly. Secondly, once that competition ends, we must simply tell all these people that are engaged in this sham election that we now have the drive. We assert our will. We don't have, this whole nonsense of the Electoral Commission roadmap. If we just adapt ourselves to it, we shall go into the gallows. An inverted process, as you have seen. Today they are nominating councillors of parishes. A parish, somebody campaigning in a parish can walk throughout the parish in one day. Why nominate them in September when their elections will be after the presidential elections in February? Why? But they are the first ones to be nominated and will be candidates for more than 6 months maybe. Then they will nominate the members of parliament who contest in a constituency, or those contesting in a district, and most districts are now one constituency. And those will contest maybe for 4 months campaign. The ones who are supposed to campaign in the whole country in 300, I think, and There are now 353 constituencies. They will be nominated in November for an election at the beginning of February, 3 months or less. It's ridiculous. Especially when they are not even allowing those who intend to contest to move around the country. You know, you saw the Honorable Chagulanyi applied to consult as required by the Constitution long before COVID. He was beaten. He never left Kampala. So when we make campaigns in Amudat, in Bondobujo, in Koboko, in when Kotindo, when we 353 constituencies. And let me tell you, if you are, I'm now an old hand in these things. For one to be felt in a campaign, you at least need to go to the sub-county. In the constituency, you need at least to visit the sub-counties if you are doing presidential campaigns. So how many sub-counties can they go to? Because even just the districts alone are now 134 plus 8 cities which also have district status. So that is 142 districts to be covered in a maximum of 90 days. So, but the votes are not the problem. As I have said, the marginalized people have all along been united. So the votes, I'm not worried about the votes. But how do you organize those votes even to galvanize them, to fight over them, and with the absence of reforms that we have been fighting for, without any reforms, where the talent center is only numbered, and so on and so forth. So my sense is, if we can eliminate the competition amongst ourselves and sit together, we can draw out a plan of stopping this madness and taking the country through a transition. We can stop this madness. Even in a week, we can stop it. We can stop it, pack Mr. Museveni back to his village and reorganize the country. The biggest beneficiary would even be the abused security institutions. Security forces have been some of the most mismanaged under this regime, where our young men, the injustice within these institutions is huge. And, getting the change that we need, to my mind, is not difficult. Change by defiance, not change by voting. We can change the country by saying simply enough is enough. And I think that's what needs to happen. That's what has happened in all countries that have had freedom. people have asserted their will. We need together to assert the will of the people of Uganda. And I cannot re-emphasize or overemphasize the urgency with which we need to do that. And once, and by the way, the reason I am very confident that together we can cause that change that quickly is because in my case, and the colleagues with whom we have been working over the last 5 years under the people's government, we have not focused on anything else except the dynamics of ending this gun rule. So we have a lot of assets in terms of organization, in terms of planning that can be rolled out and should be rolled out to achieve the change, which is, of course, what we could go ahead to do, but it does not achieve what it should achieve without the necessary unity of all of us. We need that togetherness for the maximum and best results. And in achieving that also, even before we move, we will need to conceptualize together how a transition can be managed or would be managed. And, you know, again, there are a hell lot of experiences to draw from. We are not pioneering in this kind of endeavor. And I believe we can quickly assemble the mechanisms, the structures, the programs that we need to run and manage a transition to its logical conclusion. The conclusion being to have free and fair elections. There will not be free and fair elections unless the country has been freed and reconstituted to have an effective constitutional mechanism, legal framework, institutions that are independent and competent, and that we have reconciled the country, and then we can have free and fair elections. I have, in all my political engagement, been emphasizing that at a personal level, I did not get into these struggles to seek leadership. No, I came to these struggles to seek freedom. And I have been rather saddened by a huge attempt by the usual manipulators and usual suspects in the junta, trying to depict me as somebody seeking and maybe even hungry to get into leadership. I would like to assure all our partners in this struggle that the preoccupation before all of us must be, certainly before me, is the quest for freedom, for justice, for equal opportunities. And once that is achieved, I will retire satisfied that I have a country to retire to, and that our children and grandchildren can live in a better place. So even as with my colleagues, we are advanced in our plans for activities we call Plan B. The purpose of this is first to invite the non-political leaders, as I have done. Secondly, to invite the political leaders who are preparing for an election to consider this urgent request that I have put out. And I will be making every effort of these public roads to reach out to all that are relevant. So I'd like to once again thank you for, it's been a rather long engagement, close to 2 hours. But yes, it was deliberate, and I thought it was necessary. That's why we divided last Saturday's program to include this one. Now, the reason, since I have touched at the beginning of this program, the update on COVID, and it is already Thursday, I would like to use this opportunity to notify you that we shall therefore not have the Saturday engagement this Saturday. It will resume as expected the week after. I thank you, and may God continue to bless us and to guide us to a better future. God bless all of you.